Okay, I'm here with Valerie Isan, and I'm going to pull open. Am I right in assuming that this is part of your memoir?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, and can you tell me about a bit about where this falls in the storyline? Or are you writing this as more of a narrative or more essays?
More narrative. So this is an act 3. And I've kind of just sort of, I haven't met him, but it's further enough in, but it's still really early on in the relationship.
Okay, excellent. Let me actually scoot up here to the beginning of the worksheet. Okay, so in 3 sentences or less, explain what's happening in the scene. Allie and Valerie decide to build a Day of the Dead altar to honor their loved ones that have passed away. And what are you trying to say about life? Honoring ritual and the pieces of yourself that don't follow a normal mode is important, and being with people that accept these parts of you is vital. And then you have her external pursuits to honor the past and bring Ali into her life. And then she needs to be accepted, or rather to accept herself, so that no matter who thinks what, she'll be accepted. And so, yeah, I agree. Like when we're talking more about these internal stories, the force of antagonism is often difficult to put on. And so you have the force of antagonism is grief. But I was wondering if the force of antagonism might actually be her internalized voice of criticism, rather than the grief itself, like the voice of people who have criticized her in the past. And given like what you said with the kind of what it means, and also like what her need is, that seemed that might actually be more what she's fighting against.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. And then what's wrong in the protagonist's personal world? She fights to maintain self and truth in her relationship with Ali. She doesn't have a good track record with this in other partnerships, and she slips into whatever the other wants or needs from her. Again, like other people's voices, and the way she's internalized them rather than even what people have said, probably. At a cost which she doesn't see. She sees it as flexibility and adaptability, admirable qualities have, to be sure, except when it obliterates the self. And then we're going to skip through this because we get into this here. So this is the Day of the Dead. I have just some notes that we might go over after you. We're just going to do the 3 C's at first. Okay. Conflict / inciting incident, nailed it. You change the moment where it goes from like status quo to now we're moving into, the scene for real. So super solid. I have a note here that I think is important to the choice, and that is why, and it's more of a flavor, but like, why is it important for her to have the ritual? Like, what does it mean to her? Oop, my internet connection is unstable. Am I back?
Yeah. You Excellent. Are back, but I didn't hear anything of what you said.
No worries. So right here, I have this note, but for Valerie, for you, why is it important to have that ritual? What does it mean to her? So what is it that has kept her doing this year after year, when it's been a solo practice? What meaning does it give her? What is she seeking out of doing this? AKA, why is honoring the dead important to her?
With Ali or just in general?
Just in general. Like, why is this particular ceremony important to her?
Probably because of Rob, who was another husband that died. So I guess just honoring his memory and knowing that there was a period of time after his death where any relationship felt like a betrayal of him. And so this was just a way, I think, to honor him and still be in other relationships, like, hey, I haven't forgotten you. I still honor your presence in my life. I guess that's probably, haven't really thought about it, but that was the first thing that came to mind when you asked.
That makes sense. So basically giving him a defined place in her life while allowing herself to live in the present.
Yeah.
Rather than letting his memory take over all the space in her life, kind of thing. If there's a way to bring kind of that knowledge to the reader, whether it's discussing like what that means to her, or whatnot, I think then Ollie's acceptance of this practice, even if he doesn't understand like what this means to her, then means a lot to the reader, because they also know specifically what it means to Valerie, not just honoring the dead, which a lot of people honor the dead. Some do it out of, well, this is just what we do because it's culture, but some have very personal reasons, like Valerie in this instance. It's very weird to be talking about you as a character, but we're going to stick with the character view.
Yeah. That's the way I do it.
Exactly.
So because this is a memoir, let's address that. So I could create a scene or pieces of dialogue. We're in scene right now, but I could create additional dialogue where I have that conversation with Ali. And I could say to myself, I could rationalize that this is what we would have said if we had talked about it. Or I can make the decision to not put the dialogue in and have it be internal dialogue, which would be more accurate probably. But for the purposes of the book,
I'm curious if it would fit in the earlier narrative with when she decided to first start this practice. If that would be a worthy scene in and of itself.
And so bring up this practice, have this altar ritual in another part of the book,
possibly.
So twice.
Where does the story start? Where does the memoir start in the timeline?
This memoir starts when I am unhappy in a current marriage and am leaving. I just slipped into the first person.
Yeah.
This story starts when the protagonist is leaving or wants to leave a marriage that isn't right anymore.
Paul.
And
and then we go over the relationship with Rob, and then into Ali.
Rob is before Paul.
Oh, Rob's before. So Rob died, then Paul. So,
okay. Yeah. And then I leave Paul. She leaves Paul and goes into a different relationship that lasts like the other relationship is Act 2. So Act 3 is this relationship. The whole theme of this book is not lying to herself anymore. So having to grow through, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, hold on to that. I want to hear that. But I want to ask this before I forget it. Was Paul dismissive of this ritual?
Always.
Then I think it might actually make sense for this to appear previously with the dismissal, like with like hiding it or whatever, however it was that it happened, that this ritual is practiced when in the relationship with Paul. That might actually be a really good piece during that period of dissatisfaction before leaving to add up to like one, the leaving, because then it's this beautiful reflection.
Can I create conversation about that, or do I keep that in internal dialogue? Like saying right here in this scene, it's really like internally saying it's really important to me. Like, so in this section here, it's to honor the people I love that have died. I glanced at him to gauge his reaction. So before I say glancing at him to gauge his reaction, maybe I could be not reminiscing, but thinking, Paul never accepted this. He always thought it was weird. I always tried to hide my rituals from him. So this is I don't know. Is that too
without being able
wordy?
to, without being able to see like what the beginning of the memoir looks like, my default is to say like this would be a really good scene actually towards the beginning of the memoir, where you show that actual interaction with Paul very early on, and then you can have the layers, like the feeling of dismissal, the importance of the ritual, like you can layer all that in, so that by the time the reader gets to this part, and we've seen Valerie's, practice dismissed, like, or just ignored as those, those cute, funny things she does, minimized, dismissed, maybe even laughed at, whatever it was. Then by the time we get here, when Valerie goes, and even if something similar happened in that middle relationship before Ali, like if there's a way to include like another dismissal of the Day of the Dead thing, by the time we get to here, then when Valerie tells Ali, I usually make a Day of the Dead altar, we know the weight that telling him has without you having to explain it in this scene, because we've seen it dismissed over and over.
Yeah, I can write that scene because I have one, and that did happen in the Paul with the Paul.
Does it?
With
he's
the Paul. It happened.
Because then you're foreshadowing in a way, and then you have this reflection. I think that simply putting that in there, one makes that this a huge choice in her relationship, not necessarily the choice for the scene, but it's a choice for the relationship to share this with him. And I was confused right here. Is this her asking or is it him asking?
Yeah, it's her. Valerie.
Okay, so like then we know that that's a huge measure of trust if we've seen that particularly with this particular ritual dismissed and disregarded by previous partners, the fact that she feels safe enough to ask him is this huge trust thing that we see happening here. So love that. And I think that moving it to a scene far earlier just layers it in without you having to do a lot of extra work in this scene. And then coming along to the choice. Here I wonder, and you noted the irreconcilable good in the previous section that we skipped over, as she, we'll go back to it now so I can read it. Choice number one is to interrupt his grief and make it better, which is something that a pattern that she has been in most of her life. And it's kind of been cutting off vulnerability because she's not comfortable with others, uncomfortable emotions, probably because in the past, those uncomfortable emotions have been used as tools to lash out and hurt her. And we know that she's building this trust in Ali. Or remain silent, witness and acknowledge the grief and allow him to process it by himself. But it's not her job to change him to make herself feel better. And she chooses number two. I think that you might go a little bit more heavy-handed here with saying, with a bit more information about like what the particular choice is. If she had an urge to say something, acknowledge that.
Okay.
If, all the things she could say, the denial or whatever, a little bit more detail here so that we see what the other option is in the moment and what she doesn't choose.
Okay.
And I was curious with this information about his father, was this something that had been shared previously in life, or was this something that he shared in this ritual?
can't quite remember, but I believe he had told me beforehand. He probably brought it back up again. But yeah, I think it was something I knew before.
I feel like this might be something that might be useful to pull into dialogue to kind of root us in the moment of the scene, rather than moving back and forth like mentally as far as timelines to things known before. So if he's sharing this actively, that keeps us rooted in this very intense for Valerie moment. And then I can spread out, and there could be more opportunity for bringing up the like internal emotional struggle. Exactly.
Because if he's parsing out information and I'm like, you know, wanting to say something and make it all better. And
I love that.
Good idea.
And then I had this note, and I don't know if this is appropriate for this scene, but I really like reflection, and with this being memoir and you being a slightly more literary minded writer, I had a thought of like, is there a way you can introduce an image, incident, or sense of not fitting at the very introduction of the scene that became contrasted by the scene's end? I don't know if that will end up fitting, but it was a thought I did have.
An image, incident, or sense of not fitting, between Ali and I.
Or not even just between Ali and her, but like something in her life that isn't fitting, whether like, even if it's her clothes are too tight, something, you know, like there could be just some subtle kind of look at the way you move from discomfort to comfort. There is, as we've talked about, inviting him to do the altar, though, this all is kind of surrounding her fear of not fitting. So that may actually serve as kind of like the idea that I was reaching for there.
And then, but bookending it somehow, like bringing this back up again.
I don't even know.
Instead of just.
No, I don't think you need to bring that up, because when I wrote that, we hadn't discussed like what it meant to her specifically here. And so like with her looking at the ceiling, like I can tell that that's her fear of being dismissed and rejected again. So now that we've talked about that, that may be kind of the mirror or reflection feeling that I was looking for, or suggesting, and I think it might already be there. But something to look at and see if you feel like that fits. And then, so yeah, as we talked about, like extending this into more dialogue, I had the note on my little writing pad that for this important moment, as she's working through this, that it would be really good to slow down, and extending the dialogue will do that, but also enhancing sensory details. And
I haven't done the sensory pass on the manuscript yet.
Perfect. Excellent. So you'll be hitting that up. And then I had just questions that might bring up stuff that might add depth to this particular scene, but they may not fit for either. So my questions that could possibly add more are, what did it feel like exchanging these experiences of grief when the grief itself is so unique and unshareable? And what was it like to share such a private ritual after so many years of, not really solitude, but of privacy, of doing it alone. Because like, especially knowing that this was dismissed and she probably hid it to avoid ridicule or whatever. What did it feel like to now like have this shared acceptance, beyond just, this rightness here, and kind of the contrast between previous relationships possibly. But those are just thoughts that may or may not fit. So, but I love this scene, and I love talking kind of about the whole global scheme of where she moved from to where she moves to. So excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.